Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again, and today I'm reviewing The Magician King, the sequel to Lev Grossman's The Magicians, a book I read last year and liked. It was a honorable mention in the video about my favorite books from 2017, for what that's worth. Even though I had some issues with it, I was not sure about some elements of that book. Most notably, generally speaking, this series is about people who young people who realize magic exists and go to a school where they learn how to do magic and then travel to other dimensions and such. And my main issue with that book was that all of the characters were terrible. All of them were really sort of shitheads and really annoying all the time, which is not by itself something that makes a bad book, but the way it was handled in the narrative did not convince me too much. What about The Magician King? I liked The Magician King as much as The Magicians. I probably wouldn't be talking about it at all had I not liked it, but I had some issues with it too. I thought The Magician King had different flows from its prequel, at different strengths. And I'll try to navigate you through my reading of it so that you can see whether it's the book for you, or if you've read it already, maybe you can see, you can tell me if you see what I mean. Now, The Magician King follows the same characters as the first book, obviously, and pulls off a very difficult narrative technique, which is what I call the eldest trick of double narration, of narrating two different storylines, alternating between the two of them at will. Usually one chapter is dedicated to one storyline, let's call it the main storyline, and then you get another storyline which relates to a character that was a minor character in the first book, in The Magicians, but has become sort of a new protagonist in the sequel, in The Magician King. I call it the eldest technique as in Eragon's sequel, Eldest by Christopher Paolini, does the same. Of course, alternating between different storylines is something quite common. A science fiction writer, an Italian science fiction writer called Valerio Evangelisti, is, in my opinion, the master of that technique. He can create the beautiful novels using this structure. The two storylines apparently have nothing to do with each other, but then eventually they influence each other in the most surprising of ways. He is a true master, and it is a pity that I believe he has not been translated in English yet, but I'll talk about it a bit in the description box. Check it out. Going back to Eragon and Eldest, I liked Eragon as an adolescent. I liked it very much. I liked Eldest, the sequel. I really did not like Brisingar, the third book in the series, but that's besides the point. The Magician King pulls off that same trick, this same double parallel storyline very well. It handles that beautifully, so much so that the secondary storyline about that minor character called Julia is, in my opinion, is as interesting, and actually I found it more interesting than the main storyline. With sequels such as this, when new characters are introduced or some characters are given more importance, the risk that is always there, and that I think many sequels fail to live up to, is the idea that, you know, with this type of book you want more of the same. If you liked the first book, you probably are going to look for more of what you liked. When new characters are introduced, they often feel like they take screen time away from your favorite ones. This never happens here, and that is handled beautifully. Also, Grossman has a gift for capturing the spirit of adventure, the spirit of excitement that is at the heart of fantasy. This, at the end of the day, for all that it criticizes some elements of fantasy fiction, I'll talk about it in a second, it's very much a fantasy novel, and when you get characters talking about the adventures they've had and the wondrous places they've visited, it's amazing, and it makes you really excited about their quests, about their adventures. It captures that thrill beautifully. It is maybe a bit of a pity that the adventures you hear about in this book, the adventures these characters tell you about in conversation, are always more exciting and more thrilling and more imaginative and inventive than the ones you actually see, than the ones they live in the pages of the book. I messed up the original video. The theme I talked about, the idea that this is a book that criticizes some of the main themes of its genre, is back in The Magician King and was already the key theme in The Magician. The idea that power is not going to make you happy, the wish for escapism is never going to be enough. Even if you become a wizard and go live in the land of your dreams, you're not going to be happy just because of that. You should look for happiness elsewhere, be careful what you wish for. Those types of reflections are all over the place, are very easy to pick up, and I say that in a good way. The book expresses them and reflects on them very well and very extensively. To do that though, it relies upon the same cast of shithead characters as in the first book. The point of The Magician was that you had all of these young geniuses who were never happy, no matter how powerful and how how much money they made and how many spells they learned. And in comments, some of you told me that that was the first book and that the rest of the series featured them growing up and becoming adults. That, in my opinion, has not happened at all in The Magician King. They are the same shitheads as before. They're never happy, they're always capricious, they're always spoiled. And this is reflected actually very well in the very narrative style of the book. This is a book in which a character who travels to France for the first time looks out the plane window and sees the lurid blue of the Mediterranean. Hear that adjective, the lurid blue. Is it really the word you want to use when you see the Mediterranean Sea for the first time? Or again, another character, two people are having coffee at a cafe in Venice, and one of them slaps the other, and the narrator goes, "A few people looked over, but just a few. It was Italy after all. People probably hit each other all the time." Fuck you. But why is that? Because in my take is that the whole text, most of the narration is focalized through these characters. It is not really the narrator, and it is definitely not Lev Grossman who is making a shithead comment about Italy. It is the narrator focalized through the perspective of these characters. The Mediterranean is a lurid blue because these characters do not care about shit and, look at nature, even look at the wonders of nature and of the landscape, and are never happy, never content. Same here, they travel to Italy, they travel to France, and sure, they enjoy the landscape, sure, they enjoy the food and the palaces, but they always have that snobbish attitude toward everything. They have it toward reality at large. That captures that feeling of never being satisfied very well, but after a while it becomes really annoying reading a text that is focalized extensively through this, what I once again call this shithead perspective. But once again, this is not necessarily a flaw. It may actually be one of the book's strengths, one of the things that makes it unique, and you may actually like the style a lot. I had some issues with the style when it tried to get more slangy and to, tone the register down a bit. This is clearly a book written, it reads like a book written by a nerd, not as in a, otaku slash comic book obsessed type of nerd, more as in a nerd, as in, I don't know, someone who graduated from Harvard, valedictorian. It's filled with obscure lexicon. I had to look up words all the time, which testifies both to the obvious holes in my knowledge of English and also to the obscurity, to the cryptic nature of the lexicon in this book. And still, some here and then, the narrator tries to go urban, and he goes like, what do you care, motherfucker? This is motherfucking Brooklyn. It's not convincing when the narration tries to do that. Even when the characters try to do that, it's not convincing. It sounds like, a Cambridge graduate from Bury St. Edmunds trying to convince you he grew up in a bad neighborhood. You didn't. You really didn't. At the end of the day though, my main issue with The Magician King, the one thing that I wasn't able to appreciate at all, and that influenced my whole reading and that prevented me really from falling in love with the story, even when it became very interesting, was that the tone of the book, the vibe of the book is off to me, is off all the time. I'll try to rephrase that. This feels like a book that doesn't really know what it wants to do. It doesn't really know whether it wants to be an escapist fantasy, while still reflecting on the dangers of escapism. Does it want to be some kind of satire? Does it want to be a book that tries to pull off realism while conveying otherworldly worlds and realities? Let me explain. When you read Terry Pratchett, When you read The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, that is a book that is brilliant and very effective at making fun of its own genre, making fun of the conventions and standards of fantasy fiction. When you read The Light Fantastic from Terry Pratchett, which is a book I read last year and loved, that book does the same. It's still a satire of fantasy fiction, but at the same time it is also a wonderful fantasy novel in its own right. You care deeply about the characters. It's a story about friendship, about saving the world, about high adventure. It pulls off that difficult trick of being both. The Magician King, in my opinion, is none of these categories at all, and none of any other category. At times it feels like a satire. There are some very silly jokes here and then. For instance, the Teletubbies apparently exist in this parallel universe. At times it keeps referring to fiction and Dungeons and Dragons to try and make these inside jokes about the genre, about the fantasy genre. And then it tunes that down with a dollop of brutal realism here and then. There's a very graphic description, for instance, of a rape scene in this novel that did not really fit with the rest of it. I see why that scene was there. I see the reflection on this idea that escaping into fantasy is full of dangers, but at the same time it didn't feel to me, the way all of these parts jagged with each other didn't feel to me like the beautiful dissonance and chaos of a quirky book. It felt to me just like if The Magician King didn't really know what it wanted to be. It lacked, in my opinion, on that front, both the elegance of self-reflexive fantasy fiction like Terry Pratchett's and of supernatural, let's call it fantastical fiction, that manages to be realistic, as in follows the conventions of realism while portraying these wondrous worlds. Books such as The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, books such as The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Michael Chabon and Junot Diaz respectively. Still, it is not impossible that you will appreciate it. You will actually like a lot this mixture of different attitudes that I found not to my taste. And if you are into fantasy fiction, if the general idea behind the book inspires you, and most notably if you liked The Magician, the first book, you are probably going to have some fun with The Magician King. Do let me know what you think about it. If you've read it, do let me know if you agree with me, if you had the same impression. I look forward, actually, I do look forward to reading the last installment in the series later this year, probably. And thank you for watching, as always, guys. Thanks for supporting the channel, and I will see you in a next video. Bye, guys.